Well, hello and a very good evening to you. Welcome to Tuesday Night Live. I'm so glad you've tuned in to join me, as well as those of you, of course, who are going to be watching this, listening to it during the week. Welcome to you as well. If this is your first time with Tuesday Night Live, very easy to interact. Whatever you put into the thread, either on Facebook or YouTube, will come through to me here in the StreamYard studio. So I appreciate you. Any comments you got or questions that you've got as we go through for the next hour, feel free to pop those in and I'll interact with them from time to time. Now, we're going to get into part two of what we started with last Tuesday with Shane Willard. We're looking at sex and the scriptures, or a biblical view of human sexuality. And if you didn't catch up with last week, please make sure you watch it or listen to it at some point in time over the next week or two. What we laid last week really was a foundation for what we're going to be sharing on tonight. And I want to say Shane wasn't available tonight. He's ministering elsewhere. And so last Wednesday morning, he and I caught up on StreamYard here. And I filmed with him our discussion that we're going to be sharing with you tonight. So some of tonight is pre-recorded, the bits between Shane and myself. And the rest of it, like right now, for example, is live. So between each segment of our interview, I will stop down and I'll come back on live and interact with your comments and questions as we go. And then I'll play part two, stop down again, chat with you, and then part three. So I think between those three and our chats in between, it will more than fill up the next hour. So we're going to get into that in just a moment. Right now, though, let's just see who has tuned in so far. Merv, you're first up, mate. He says, evening, everybody. Hi to Sandra. G'day to Grant as well, who's looking forward to part two. And other Sandra Rogovine from north of Melbourne, a long way north. Good evening to you. And Rob as well, tuning in. And hi to Tom and to Chris. God bless you both. And a big welcome to you. Hi, Rihanna. And who else we got here? Shelley says here, hi again, been so long, looking forward to this, all the way from South Africa. God bless you, Shelley, and good evening to Nika as well. Tal, good evening to you, mate. God bless you. People popping in left, right, and center, which is wonderful. And I'll come back to all of your comments and questions a little bit later on as well. So, as I say, our interview, Shane and my discussion is pre-recorded. And so here's part one. I hope you enjoy this. All right, Shane, well, welcome back. Let's just do a quick recap. Give me a 60-second précis of what you covered last week.
Oh, great. Okay. Let's see if I could do that. That the central application of the book of Romans was to allow part of our imagination of what worshiping God looks like, to include being able to accept people without affirming everything they do. That Paul was asking the Jews to accept Gentiles who had no emotional connection to Scripture. They actually would have disregarded it, hadn't heard of most of it. And the Jews were using Scriptures as weapons against these people. And the Gentiles, on the other hand, were looking down on the Jews because to them, they were living with an outdated sort of consciousness. And that part of addressing any difficult issue on earth is garnering the humility to be able to accept a person while not having to feel pressured to affirm everything about that person, allowing space for conversation and growth. And then we talked about in terms of engaging things in our world, we should see ourselves as the plank and other people as the speck. And we talked through a bit of planks like purity culture that we should repent from. And then we closed off last week introducing 6 tensions that are a better way to frame discussions around sex than is it right or wrong, in or out? Can I still go to heaven if I die? If I do, how far can I go and still be accepted? There are 6 tensions, and the one we introduced was, does my sexual behavior honor the image bearer in the person, or does it objectify them in any way? And we went back to Genesis 1 and talked about the gift of the image, or the salim of God being gifted to every person, and how that changed the world. It actually, it took 300 years into Christianity, but it actually started to change Roman law. And we talked about exposure and things like this. And our friend Tal made some sort of brilliant insight about how the word image there is actually a verb about how you interact with your world and bring essentially God's presence to your world. And and so the question is, and I think that's interesting, because one of the ways that I've been taught to read Genesis 1 out of, there's 30 ways, but I love that about scripture, by the way, too, is I think it's important for us to point out, and you point this out all the time, that scripture is not meant to be studied to find the one true meaning, but rather explore the endless meanings, particularly with parables and poems and things like this. And so, and we've both had moments where we've sat with someone who gave us a different way of reading, say a parable, and we were like,
it's mind-bending. It's wonderful, isn't it?
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. Yeah.
You have that moment where you go, oh my goodness, I've never seen it like that before.
Never seen that one. That's a good one. I don't even know if I agree, disagree, whatever. It doesn't matter. What matters is you've got me engaging the text. And one of the ways that I was taught to read Genesis 1 was that God was building a temple. And the last thing you do when you build a temple is you put the image of the God inside the temple. And so we were trusted as image bearers. Now, later writers had a slightly different take on that, where they called us the body of Christ, or like the living embodiment of God to our world. And so, but either way, the principle's the same. And it should invoke a question, like, how are we doing with that? Like how are we at being the source of compassionate grace, slow to anger, abounding in love and forgiveness, as Exodus 34:6 says that God is? How are we doing that without it feeling any indictment from me or you? And the last thing either one of us would want would be anybody watching this feeling like we're going like that. No, planks, specks. How are we? How are we doing with that? And so that's where we ended last week, was this idea that if we apply that principle to sex, how are we doing honoring the image bearer in the person? And the opposite of honoring the image bearer in the person would be to objectify them. And the problem with objectification sexually is that it tends not to limit itself to sex. So once you learn to objectify someone in one area, it tends to leak to other areas. So the next thing you know, the waitress is an object to serve you. The waiter is an object to serve you. The person behind the counter at the airport, they're an object to serve you, instead of an image bearer who we're there to be the presence of God for. And that creates a pretty awful world. If like one of the ways I like to frame discussions around faith is that if the whole world converted to think how you're thinking about God, would the world be better? And
great question.
Yeah, if the world's not better, then I think there's a problem with the way you're thinking about God. And so for this particular topic, I think one way to think about it is, if the whole world converted and thought about your own sexuality and other people's sexuality the way you're thinking, would it make the world better? And so to keep this personal, because what tends to happen with any topic, but particularly with this topic, is people start thinking, oh, they need to hear this. Okay, but just for a second, let's look at the plank and say, wait a minute, my sexual behavior, does it honor the image bearer or does it objectify?
Great question. Love it. So
Mm.
that's number one of 6.
Mhm.
What's number 2?
2 is, I think we need to navigate the tension between, and we alluded to this last week, but is the tension between accepting of a person necessarily meaning affirming everything that person does. Frankly, we just don't do that with anything. I spoke at a live event at your church the other night, and I fully accept everybody there. But I'm sure if I knew everything about each person there, there would be something I wouldn't affirm in terms of their behavior. Gluttony is a great example of that. Like I fully accept people who struggle with habitual overeating. I fully accept them. But at the same time, that doesn't mean I would affirm eating 5,000 calories a day. I think that will hurt you in the long run. And so what happens is, on one end of things, people refuse to accept others, which Paul clearly called us to do, to accept people that we don't understand, to accept people who don't have the same views as us, to accept people who, in Paul's case, they were just totally disregarding something that would have been very important to Paul, but Paul saw the resurrection of Jesus as something that superseded that. But without having to affirm everything about them. And so on one end, there are people who refuse to accept people unless they can affirm all their behavior. And then those people's world gets very, very, very small. As a speaker, I've been confronted before. This is a great example of this. And I want to be fair to this guy. If he's watching, I wish the whole world confronted people like you do. He was kind. He gave me the benefit of the doubt. He didn't write a letter to you about me. He actually looked at my schedule, which is public. He drove to where I was. He then kindly asked me for 5 minutes of my time after the busyness had died down. He then affirmed what I had meant to his life. He then gave me the benefit of the doubt around this rumor he had heard about me. But he was so bothered by it, he wanted to ask me about it. And so I'm like, where's this guy? I want the whole world being like this guy. And the rumor he had heard was that I had done the Seventh-day Adventist conference, which was true. It was absolutely true. And I was the first non-Adventist to be asked to that conference. And so I took that very seriously. I was honored as anything. And he'd also heard I'd speak for the Catholics in Sydney, which is true. And I said, look, while we're at it, I've done the ACC state conferences. I've done Equippers conference. I've done the AOG national conference in New Zealand. There's a lot. I've had to wear a robe before, Rob. I had to wear a robe, and I had to ask, do you wear anything underneath these robes? I've had to do that. And so, and so this really bothered him. And so because he gave me the benefit of the doubt, I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. And so I said, man, tell me what bothers you about that. And he said, what bothers me is the person who God has used the most to help me with my faith. Turns out he doesn't believe anything. He just shows up wherever he is and fits right in. And that's, I said, man, I'm not really following you here. He said, well, do you agree with the Seventh-day Adventist? And I said, man, I got to be honest. I never considered once if I agreed with them. I like them. They believe in Jesus. They're nice to their communities. They're generous people. What's there not to agree with? And he said, Shane, they worship on Saturday. And I'm like, yeah, but that's not the most important. That's not the most dangerous thing about a Seventh-day Adventist. The most dangerous thing about a Seventh-day Adventist is that they're vegans. I was there for 5 days. I did 6 sessions and ate 70,000 grams of fiber. Rob, I frankly got tired of going to the toilet, to be honest with you. And it's, Rob, I ate a brownie made of vegetables.
Oh,
I ate a brownie, and I got to be honest. Tasted pretty good, to be fair.
Okay.
And so but his point of view is a symptom of a problem, which is that the only people that should be accepted in our world are people that we fully agree with or affirm. Well, that would be a pretty bad world. And I think
it's a very
leaves,
small world, isn't it? Then your world shrinks to a whole lot of people who are exactly like you.
It's a monotony instead of polyphony, right? So when everything in your world is one sound, one voice, you can't wonder why you're depressed. There's no flavor at all to your salad. And so the question in that tension is whose job is it to be the source of conviction and change? And in my point of view, I think that when we have tried to be the source of conviction, that we're not good at it. At very best, it comes off not nice. That God has to be the only source of conviction and change, and our job is to facilitate and celebrate anyone's next yes when God nudges them. And so the first tension is image bearer or object. The second tension is acceptance versus affirmation. The third one, I think this one's really important, is the tension between accepting a person and understanding their story. I think when we confuse those things, we lead to some pretty bad tonnage, some pretty bad things. I'll give you an example about something I know about from racism in America. Okay, so I'm not speaking at all to Australia or New Zealand or South Africa or anybody else. I'm not speaking about that specific situation because I don't know enough to speak that intelligently about it. But I do know enough about American racism to speak to it. And one, not the whole issue, but one of the issues with racism in America are not overt racist, which of course there are. It's the bigger problem is good-hearted white people who don't think they're racist. And the reason they don't think they're racist is because they fully accept people of color. And they do. But then when you talk to them, they don't understand the narratives, right? So what they've done is they've removed understanding from the equation of what acceptance means. And to accept without understanding taints the acceptance. Like if you told Christy, look, I'm a little tired of having this conversation. I just want you to know, I love you. I fully accept you, but I don't understand a word coming out of your mouth. Well,
that would not go down well. Yeah.
No, because actually she'd probably rather you understand and then make an informed choice than she would want you to just throw understanding out the window. And I, as a side point, I think that's part of the beauty of the incarnation was, I mean, God's God. He could have just accepted whoever he liked. He could do what he wants. But the incarnation shows us that accepting humans was not the ultimate goal. It was actually engaging in their broken story to understand the story. It's like so no human being could ever say to God, you don't get it. You don't get it. I had to die. And so it's that. I like, so as an example, I had a chat with a very good-hearted, non-racist white person in their 70s in America, and this person, no chance that they're like an overt white sheet racist. It's not that at all. But when I got to speaking to them, they were asking me, they said, look, we really respect you. Like, why are the Black people, why are they overreacting to X, Y, Z? And I know this person's heart. They truly do accept Black people. But when I asked them, hey, tell me what happened in your heart with what happened to Emmett Till, this person was like, that rings a bell. What happened to Emmett Till? And you're going, that happened in your lifetime. Or Walter McMillan, who was framed and spent years on death row before he was exonerated. And the sheriff that framed him is still the sheriff today, because sheriffs are elected. Emmett Till, if you don't know the story, was a 14-year-old that was beaten to death. He was kidnapped out of his uncle's house in Money, Mississippi, and beaten to death by these white guys. And they were arrested, but because it was an all-white jury, they were acquitted in less than 10 minutes. And then they were paid to tell the story of how they did it by a magazine, because in America, you can't be tried for the same crime twice. So the lack of understanding of the narratives actually taints the acceptance. And I think that's true when it comes to sexuality. There's this brilliant, in my opinion, brilliant insight in a book in the Bible called Lamentations, which frankly in our circles don't get a whole, that book doesn't get a lot of playtime. It's not a crowd building kind of poem, but it's actually just a quick education on the basics of it. It's 5 poems. The first 2 are 22 verses, the last 2 are 22 verses, and the middle one is 66 verses. So it's this perfect chiastic symmetry on how to think about suffering. And the obvious absence in this book is God. God is silent. God's being blamed, and then God stays silent amongst being blamed. It's sort of like Jesus that way, like they were accusing Jesus and he just stayed silent. There's a lot of wisdom in that too. And so what ultimately happens in the story is the woman gets blamed, which I know. I get it. So yeah. So there's this humanization. So there's 3 characters. There's a narrator who is like this emotionless sort of, I just tell the facts person. And then there's this lady, and the lady is the humanization of the city of Jerusalem after it had been ransacked by Nebuchadnezzar. And then later in the story, there's a man, and the man would be the humanization of the temple system or the priestly system, or some say Jeremiah himself. Either way, right? And so, and the poem starts with this 9-verse rant about, just picture a news reporter going, this has happened, this has happened, this has happened. Oh, how bad the city looks. There used to be people here. Now there's not people here. The enemies have taken over. They've raped us to death. She's been raped to death. There's this just fact. And then toward the end of the news commentator's facts, he gives his opinion now on why. And he says, well, it's obvious why, that the woman committed adultery. The city had other lovers, and the other lovers promised they'd be there for her, and now they're nowhere to be found. And it's sad, but let's just call it what it is. We don't mince words around here. We speak the truth, right? And then he says what might be the most vulgar sentence in the whole Bible. I haven't scoured the whole Bible looking for vulgarities, but it's pretty vulgar. In Lamentations 1:9, this is a direct quote. It says, quote, her uncleanness was in her skirt. Like,
it's pretty blunt, isn't it?
The English cleaned that up. Like he's saying she has a dirty lady part, right? And so he essentially, don't act like you didn't commit adultery. Your uncleanness is up your skirt. And it's at that point where the lady speaks up. She hasn't said a word till now. And then she just says, oh Lord, behold my affliction. For the enemy has triumphed. And then for the next chapter and a half, I think there's 9 requests for him to look at my distress, look at my despair, look at my pain. One sentence even says, God made us eat our own babies, which was like bizarre. But her thing with the narrator is, I'm not asking you for your advice. I'm not asking you for your wisdom. I'm not asking for you to create a poorly constructed meme to give me a Bible verse that will fix every problem I've ever had. I'm not asking for that. I'm asking for you to look, chapter and a half. And then a chapter and a half later. So this is kind of hard to see unless you're reading it all in one sitting. A chapter and a half later, the narrator speaks back up and he changes his tone. And here's what he says. This is quote, Lamentations 2:13, quote, what can I say for you? To whom can I compare you to, O daughter of Jerusalem? That's sounding different. Your uncleanness is up your skirt. To then, what can I liken to you, that I may restore comfort to you, O virgin daughter? So he goes from your uncleanness is up your skirt to how can I restore comfort to you, O virgin daughter?
Beautiful.
And that is a tonal shift that I think is critical, essential to a helping relationship. It is driven by empathy, not knowledge. And I think when it comes to the world around us, particularly around the topic of sex, there's been enough pain. And as Lamentation says, ruin as vast as the sea. There's been enough pain in people's stories that before we bark at someone weaponizing a scripture, maybe we ought to take a second and look, see their story, look at their pain. Otherwise, even if someone's telling the truth, if it sounds like your uncleanness is up your skirt, that is missing the point and fundamentally different than how can I restore comfort to you, a virgin daughter? People ask me occasionally, Rob, they'll say, well, when do you confront? Like when do you actually take the time and confront people? And what's the litmus test for that? And I think one of the litmus tests is not considering what if they reject your confrontation, but what if they say yes? What if they say, holy smokes, you're right. I need to sort this out. I just have not one clue where to would you walk me through the process of what restoring this situation would look like? And then at that point, if you're like, well, I'm busy, I don't like,
Yeah,
well,
that's right.
Well, yeah. Correct, right?
Yeah.
So one of the things I consider before I confront is if they responded to my loving confrontation with, I need help, but I don't know where to start. If I'm not willing to do that, I probably should shut up and let someone else, be the person to walk them through that, because otherwise I'm just ranting.
Yeah. I love what you're saying because, and I tell this to our church regularly, we need to sit with people and hear their stories. What's life like for you? It's so easy just to glibly point the finger, quote a verse, and move on with life. That doesn't lead to change. And so, yeah, I've said that to my daughters at different times when especially when they were at school and they would, they'd come home and someone at school was acting in a way that was frustrating. And I would invariably say, so I wonder what's going on in their world at the moment. And sit and listen, get to know them. This is wonderful, Shane. We're going to take a quick break at this point, and we'll be back with more in just a moment.
Well, there you go. Hope you're enjoying this discussion. Some great teaching from Shane, as always, here on Tuesday Night Live. And one of the things I love that he talked about there was accepting people, but not necessarily affirming what everyone does. And I'm sure other people will view us in that way as well. And that we can accept people without agreeing with everything that they think or say or whatever, but we accept the person. I'm actually going to be doing some teaching around this topic this coming Sunday morning at Bayside Church. And so you can join me either in person or live stream as we look at what we should do as Christians when we disagree, when we're in conflict and all of that. How can Christians disagree but remain in unity? And so I'm going to be sharing the scriptures and some practical ways that will really, really help us remain in unity, even though we may have differences in some ways. Let me check your comments. There's lots of comments coming through here. Good day to Sean. He's joining us from Millicent in South Australia. Good evening to Carolyn. Hi to Kerry. Good day, Gladys. Hi, Kirsten. Kirsten's joining us from Vietnam. God bless you. Kirsten and Dale are members of Bayside Church, and Kirsten's working over in Vietnam for a while. So glad that you can join us, Kirsten. We have been praying for you and trusting that God is blessing you. And I believe that Dale is with you now, I think. If not, he's on the way. So I have heard. Good day to Mark. And a couple of comments there from Mark and Tal as well. Wonderful compassion, says Carolyn. And I'll interact with some of the other comments here if we've got time because the discussion with Shane, there's two more sections to it that are not quite as long as that one, by the way, but I want us to make sure that we get all of the interview with Shane across tonight. G'day to Samantha as well. So she's watching from Tassie. So we've got people from all around Australia and all around the world joining us on Tuesday Night Live. God bless you. All right, let's get into part 2 of my chat with Shane on biblical sexuality.
This is a very good point. Like this was over 25 years ago. So now I was on staff at a church, and one of the staff people went through a marriage failure, and the marriage failure was due to the spouse had engaged in, the only word it would be horrendous, dangerous behavior. Like multiple times. But because she had children, she didn't want to give full disclosure to everybody as to what happened, because the kids didn't need to know all that. And so the board of the church knew and kept it quiet, and then of course there was church people, you don't care about marriage, you're a covenant breaker. But if they would have taken the time to know the details, which they could not know, the judgment would be different. It'd be kind of like if let's say if you were on a this would be insane, but if you were on a bus to Sydney, and let's say there were 3 children, 8, 6, and 4 on the bus, and they're running up and down the aisles, and they're throwing food, and they're just being basically disruptive. Judgments would automatically start coming into your head. And to be fair, plank in my eye, it would come in my head faster than yours because you have children. And so these rambunctious children would just annoy me, and they're acting like acting like crazy people, and they're throwing food, and my judgment would immediately go, where is the parent? Like, yeah. Where's and then you kind of look around, you notice the dad's sitting there aloof, he's like looking at his phone, he's like letting them just act insane. And then of course people around you there gets to be a gang on effect, like sir, control, like, and then finally someone speaks up and someone says, excuse me, sir, your children are acting insane, control your kids. Like, what is your problem? Right. And then the guy goes, oh, I'm so sorry, I'm just lost in my head. Their mom just died, and we just came from her funeral, and I can't think straight. I'm like, what am I going to do? And they're hurt. I'm sorry they bothered you. Please forgive us. And then suddenly same actions, it's like the judgment actually is sound in the terms of they were acting how they shouldn't have acted. But then because you have more information, now the action and the tone shifts. Now everybody in the bus would be, getting them around to play games, and somebody would go sit by the guy and say, look, sorry, it's just information changes that. Yeah.
So true.
So the fourth tension is the sacred versus the profane. So sacred, a lot of times what people have a problem with in terms of sex is confusing something that's sacred with something that's profane. Now, let me be clear about this, because words matter less than how people picture words working. When I say profane, I don't mean wrong. What I mean is something that's meant to be sacred, or something that's meant to be holy, or just for you, gets put out in public for everybody. It's something that is sacred gets treated as if it's common. And so the Jewish people, again, I would surrender to Tal on this. They have this beautiful picture at a wedding called a huppah, And it's just this covering of God's presence. And then the second huppah was over the marriage bed in the ancient world. And the idea is that your sexuality is meant to be under the huppah. And if there's too many people allowed in the huppah, then it taints the sacredness of what's under it. And so there's a lot of examples of this. The most obvious one is adulteries and things like where lots of people are under the same huppah. But this could be anything. This is why the most genitality sort of places, or let's say the most erotic places, are often the least sexual. So as an example, if you went to the red light district in Amsterdam, and there's streets the streets are blocked by preference. So, body size, color of skin, this kind of thing.
Wow.
And I spoke in Amsterdam once, and the pastor there took me there just to let me see it. And it wasn't what I thought. I mean, there's kids walking around, but these girls are in these windows, in basically bathing suits. And street one might be Scandinavian girls of a certain build. Street two might be Asian. Street three might be African, whatever the case may be. And it's an incredibly erotic sort of place, but it's definitely not sexual. There's a difference between eroticism and sexuality, because there's a way that you can engage in something erotic, but when you leave it, you feel less connected than ever before, which is fundamentally not sexual, right? So, because sex is restoring reconnection. And that's what happens when something that is best explored in the world of the sacred gets profaned. It gets put out in front of everybody. And then too many people are in your sacred space. I've known you and Christy for years, and we've had some great conversations, but certainly there are things in your and Christy's life that's just between you two. Yeah. And should be, and you guys might have like a code around a certain way of speaking about it. That's it. But think about what happens. And more often than not, it's the man that breaks this because he thinks he's being funny. He's not being malicious. He thinks he's being funny. And he'll tell a story to his friends about his wife and if the wife's sitting there, she's thinking, what? You're not supposed to be sharing that. And then the guy's like, but it's the truth. It's not wrong. Yeah, but it's not wrong, but it's just profane. It's taking something I thought was under our huppah and putting it out in public. And we've both been in small groups enough to see that happen awkwardly. Yes. Enough. And more often than not, it is the man, because there are certain things, and specifically around sex in general, the details of our sex lives belong in private.
Yes, they do. Yeah.
They're just, when it comes out in public, even if it's not wrong, it's yuck. So even if you took, if let's say a youth pastor is married and has been married for 6 years, and the youth pastor and his wife take 5 14-year-olds to coffee at Macca's, and they share the details of their sex life with these 14-year-olds. Well, and then somebody says something, and then they get pulled in, and you say to them, "What are you?" You're like, "What? We're married. We're monogamous. We're we are committed. We're telling them about how beautiful this can be, right?" And you're like, "Yeah, but that's profane, because you took something that is meant to be private and you put it out for everybody to see in public." And that becomes a problem. So that's the fourth tension. The fifth tension, I think, is creation versus anti-creation. And what I mean by that is the creation narratives. And let me define that. Creation is what happens when God engages our broken chaos and wraps himself in our story to make a better narrative out of that story. That's creation, or better, new creation. Or you could say resurrection, or if you want, revival. Whatever the case may be, this is when God engages a broken, chaotic narrative and makes a better story out of that narrative. And creation works one way. It goes from disorder to order, from chaos to new creation. It goes from broken to whole. And so the question, I think, that's better than, is it right or wrong? Can I go to heaven when I die? I think does my sexual behavior, if extended into perpetuity, does it honor the image bearer or object? Or does it lead, here's another question, does my sexual behavior lead me to a creation experience or a disordered anti-creation experience? So does my sexual behavior, does it travel the state of my life in the wrong direction? Am I going to more disorder, more pain, more chaos, more confusion? Or am I going towards wholeness, new creation, fresh starts, second chances, that kind of thing? And I think that's a good way. That's a better way. Image bearer and object and creation, anti-creation are better filters for how we think about our sexual behavior.
Yeah, they are. And by creation, you're not just referring to the ability to have kids, are you? Not
no. We're talking about no, that's procreate. It's actually, it's actually when I say creation in this context, I'm saying God's willingness to engage our chaos and broken story to make a new creation ordered story out of it. And when we are surrendered to that, our behavior in every area of our life, whether it be food or sex or how we treat our neighbors or whatever, all of our behaviors should honor the image bearer in the person and not objectify them. And all of our behaviors should be leading towards order, not disorder, towards peace, not chaos. And as the Jewish people would call it, shalom.
Yeah. Nothing missing, nothing broken.
Correct. The sixth tension is personal freedom for the sake of rights versus humility for the sake of the whole. I think this is a critical thing in Romans 14 and 15 in particular, where Paul is talking about the nature of being able to accept people and live in peace that don't necessarily see eye to eye with us. That part of that is preferring, in humility, preferring the other person. It's like, well, I have a right to do something, but if I engage in that just for the sake of doing it, it's going to hurt the whole. So I'm going to humble myself for the sake of the whole. And I think this kind of mixes with the sacred profane thing, that sometimes things just belong in private. I think if we navigate those six tensions, that can create a better story. Because which leads me to Paul in 1 Corinthians. So Paul deals with what he calls sexual immorality in 1 Corinthians 6.
Oh, right. Well, there you go. Some fantastic teaching there. And we haven't got any other comments. So obviously you're very wrapped in what Shane is saying. Everyone's kind of hands off the keyboard, which is cool. So let's get into our last segment tonight with Shane Willard on biblical sexuality. Here we go.
1 Corinthians 6.
Yeah. So there's two things going on here. One is there was a saying in Corinth, and I read this in, I want to say it was Tom Holland's book Dominion, but to hire a prostitute in Corinth, you would say food for the stomach for food, right? So essentially it was a metaphor that my drives are going to get satiated one way or the other. It may as well be with you. And the prostitutes in Corinth were not voluntary. They were 9-layered class systems, and these were underclassed people who were forced to work in these situations. And actually, in the Roman Empire, the wives loved the brothels because there was no birth control. Soap was not really a thing, and so it was illegal in the Roman Empire to sleep with someone else's wife or to commit adultery. And the reason is because it would violate the peace of Rome. You'd have this clan and this clan fighting, but brothels, and you should see some of the ruins of them, man. Some of the pictures. It was basically like like the brothels in Pompeii were basically like Chinese restaurants. You walk in and you had body type, position, how many, right? So you might say, I want a number 3 with a number 7 and a number 10, right?
Wow.
And the order was, well, food for the excuse was, well, food for the stomach for food. That's first. Second, in Paul's letters, we have to keep in mind there's a literary device called diatribe that's in play in all of them. And diatribe, this isn't a hermeneutics lesson, but we got to talk about it. Like diatribe is in letters. If he's taking on an opponent, he has to clearly articulate the view of the opponent and then respond. So he does this all the time. 1 Corinthians 11, which was the famous passage that people have used to beat up women, like that. Yeah. Women were made for man, but man was made for God, and this and that. But if you just keep reading 2 sentences, Paul says, "Nevertheless, I say, in Christ, there's no difference." But right, so he's articulating the voice of an opponent and then responding, which is really problematic if you've been told your whole life that God wrote the whole Bible. Like every word in there is God. It's like, no, sometimes there's quoting an enemy.
Job, you've got Satan speaking, and right, 3 miserable comforters. Yeah.
Right. And then, well, in the Gospels, there was a group of people who said Jesus was full of Beelzebub. So sometimes the Bible's just telling you what happened. And then in letters in particular, because Paul's not there, he's having to respond to this. And so here's what he says. This is 1 Corinthians 6. I have the right to do anything you say. So he's quoting their point of view, right? Yeah. But not everything's beneficial, which is his response. Like, how wise is that? Like getting caught in the is it right or is it wrong field, I think risk a big thing. And that's the oldest lie told in the Bible, and it's told by a talking snake. It's a pretty big lie because there's a lot of things that aren't wrong, but they're not wise. They're not beneficial, right? I have the right to do anything. There, he's quoting them. But I will not be mastered by anything. Now, if that's his response, you say food for the stomach and the stomach for food. God will destroy them both. In other words, it really doesn't matter if my drives are going to be satiated one way or the other, and the whole thing, all of us die. What difference does it make? That was their point of view. And here's Paul's response. The body, however, is not meant for sexual immorality, but for the Lord, and the Lord for the body. By his power, God raised the Lord from the dead. There's that resurrection, and will raise you also. Do you not know that your bodies are members of Christ himself? Shall I then take the members of Christ and unite them with a prostitute? Never. And I want to be clear about this. Paul's not anti the prostitute here. He would have been very anti-sex slavery. Yes. He's actually attacking the modern prostitution system by attacking the Johns, would be our vernacular. Do you not know that he who unites himself with a prostitute is one with her in body? For it is said the two will become one flesh. But whoever is united with the Lord is one with him in spirit. Flee sexual immorality. All other sins a person commits are outside the body. Whoever sins sexually sins against their own body. Do you not know that your bodies are the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You're bought with a price. And then here's his application: to honor God with your body. And so the idea, the idea that we can't control our sexuality or our sexual behavior is a better way to say that. The idea we can't control our sexual behavior is not the voice of realism. It's the voice of despair. Like, are we all just doomed to food for the stomach food, like whatever? And again, that brings me back to a question: are we moving towards greater chaos or greater order? And I think there's three basic narratives, and then there's some solutions that we need to talk about. One is that there's three basic narratives people live in with their sexual behavior. One is called erotic play, and erotic play is food for the stomach for food. I'm going out. My basic lust and desires are going to get fulfilled one way or the other. May as well be with you. It's erotic play, but the problem with erotic play is it appears more sexual than other expressions of sexuality, but it's decidedly less sexual, because when you engage in erotic play, you're engaging in something that fundamentally pronounces your disconnection after it's over. It's just like there's a way.
So true.
There's a way that well, if you go to the right bar and wait long enough, there's a way you could engage in sexual behavior every night this week with a different person, take all morality and all that, set it to the side. There's a way to do that, and even if you're an atheist, where there's no where if you think food for the stomach for food, that's fine. But at the end of the day, that is decidedly less sexuality and more genitality, because what it will do is it makes you more aware of where you're disconnected, and it produces a primary fear of rejection. And that's that. And then the second narrative is a step towards more order, which would be like I don't know what the word would be for it, but like committed friendship, or committed to intimate connection. Let's call it that way. And that's monogamous. It's one person with another person, and the goal is to express a feeling of connection with someone you truly love. There's freedom of expression with consent, with no fear of shaming. Now, freedom of response in this narrative is really important, because the other person has to be free to act within their own will, and without any fear of being ashamed on the internet. And there's a lot of good in that narrative, and it's fundamentally a better narrative than erotic play. But then the third narrative would be covenant promise. Covenant promise, and I think this is important to be said, because I think this is a plank in our eye. Covenant promise does not guarantee a healthy sexuality. It doesn't. I was told when I was a kid that, if you just wait and then you get married, that's a magic elixir, that it all just comes together. And that was a lie. I mean, I get asked occasionally, because let's be fair, in the Bible, in the Bible, the average age of marriage was like 13. Like you had your first period, and then within 5 or 6 weeks, it was organized for you to be married to some person from another tribe for sugar and the promise of defense and whatever the case may be. And so when the average age of marriage is 31, you can understand why the rules sort of change. This is a funny story. I was in Amsterdam, and I was doing a relationship seminar kind of thing, and they didn't, and I haven't mentioned this yet, but for your viewers who might not know, my master's degree is in clinical psychology in the area of sex. So I have a academic.
You know what you're talking about here.
Well, kinda. And so in theory I do, Rob. In practice, pretty much crap. But in theory, I'm the best. And so there was this 47-ish year old lady. Now they didn't do it like I would have done it. Like they did a married session and a single session in a different room, and then a married Q&A and a singles Q&A. And then there was another speaker, and we were flip-flopping, right? And man, there was like 6 married couples, and there was like 120 single people. Like it was, because marriage is starting to go away in Europe. And And so in the singles Q&A, this lady in her mid to late 40s said, look, I'm new to faith. Let me define that. 6 weeks ago, I surrendered my life to Jesus. Okay, so she's one of these people that wouldn't have any emotional connection to whatever Bible verse, somebody would be using. She said, and look, no one's saying this, but it's certainly being intimated that I should wait to have sex until I'm married again. And so I just said, well, what's your question? She said, my question is, am I the only one here that thinks, and she used an obscenity, which I won't use. She said, am I the only one here that thinks that's dumb as crap? And she said, follow me here. She said, marriage is designed by law to cost you half your things if it doesn't make it to 85 years old. Why would anybody risk half their net worth with someone who could be a pervert? They could be hooked on porn. And spoiler alert, if you ask them if they're a pervert or if they're hooked on porn, they tell you no. The only way to know is to try. And then based on how they're acting. She said, why would you make a 40-something year decision without knowing those things? That just sounds dumb, right? So the whole room sat up, and think about all the things I'm juggling live. My ultimate priority is that she continues with her faith in Jesus, regardless of what I'm fixing to say, right? And I told her that. I said, look, what I'm fixing to say, regardless of it, there's no vacancy in God's work in your heart. You keep journeying with Jesus no matter what I'm fixing to say. And the way I went through it with her was I just said, look, if you introduce sex too early, a enzyme is released in your brain called oxytocin, and it blinds you to the obvious character flaws that you'll have to deal with later. And so this is why the biggest clump of divorces is at 7 years, because at 5 years, you can't out-sex what bothers you about them. So, right. So you've seen this 100 times. They come to your office and they're like, this isn't the man I married, and you're like, yeah, he is. He was a slob back then, bit lazy, played video games, but you had lots of numbing agent, and you thought, oh, whatever. Or this isn't the woman I married. Oh, yes, it is. She was jealous, cantankerous, possessive, didn't handle criticism well, and, couldn't cook, but you're like, well, there's lots of numbing agent. We'll eat out, whatever, right? And so 5 years into the relationship, you now have to deal with the character flaw that was exhibiting itself before, but the Novocaine was blinding you to it. And so she says back to me, well, so what you're saying is that I shouldn't make a 40-year decision with drugs on my brain. And I was like, yes. And so, these there are narratives that are better narratives, but I think there's a few solutions. And I think one primary solution that feeds into the image bearer object tension and the sacred profane tension is to stop. Let's see. I say it. I'll use a theological word, to change our thinking or to repent from the primary image we have of God in our head of being existent. That let me be clear on this. God does not exist. That's just a dumb idea. And I'm not mad at anybody. I know what they mean. What they mean is God is real. And yes, amen. But when someone says God exists, for something to exist, it has to be an object outside of you. So this water bottle exists. It's an object outside of me, and it exists to serve me, actually. Well, that's not God. That was every god in the Roman Empire. Every god in the Roman Empire was an existent god. Existent buildings, existent temples, existent images, existent rituals. And so the Roman Emperor Trajan, I read about this in Unholy Allegiances by David de Silva. The Roman Emperor Trajan killed Christians, and the official charge on the Roman docket in court was atheism. And the reason is the Roman governors would ask the Christians, where does your God exist? And the Christian answer was, like, in other words, where's his temple? Where's his image? Where are people giving offerings so we can get our cut, right? And the Christian response to that was, our God does not exist. Our God indwells or insists. And so they killed him for atheism. And so the question would be, okay, if the whole world thought about God that way, how would that make the world a better place? How does that help our sexuality? How does that help our sexual behavior? How does that do that? Well, an existent God can choose sides. I prefer men instead of women. I prefer whites instead of blacks. I prefer the rich instead of the poor. An existent God can do that, but not an indwelling spirit. If there's one Christ holding the whole thing together, then there's no such thing as Jew nor Greek, slave nor free, male nor female, ended the class systems. There's no, you can't treat someone who's not like you as less than you without violating the spirit of Christ that's holding the whole thing together. And imagine the implications of just that one principle to all of our lives in terms of how we treat people, especially our sexuality.
Awesome. That's a mic drop moment right there.
I think so. I think that's a big solution. I think it leads to better questions like image bearer object, unity or division. Does the way I speak, act, behave, does it lead to more unity or more division? Does it lead to more order or more disorder and confusion? Does it lead to chaos or does it lead to new creation? I think we need a better definition of sex. Sex is what happens between two people involving physical pleasure, or sex is all the ways we strive to reconnect with our world, each other, and God. Because healthy sex involves boundaries, consent, participation. And any time we're participating with restoring dignity to any person anywhere. In that sense, some of the most sexual people are the celibates. They're the ones who have foregone the physical pleasure part of it to be fully engaged with their world and make their world a better place. I think there's some better questions we should be asking, like, is it wise? Is it useful? Does it restore dignity? Is it helpful? What do I become if I continue down the path that I'm on? And none of this gets accomplished, Rob, without creating a shame-free space where people can be honest about their drive. Like if we make an analogy to food here, I was told when I was a teenager to be a sexual anorexic. Just deny it.
Yeah.
And sexual anorexics are dangerous because it lacks authenticity and you don't know what they're hiding. Now, sexual gluttons are dangerous. Like, I just food for the stomach for food, whatever. And then, of course, there's sexual bulimics who binge and purge. And but I think we can overcome a lot of that by creating shame-free space where people can be honest about their drive, to help people redirect their sexual energy in much healthier ways, to help them reconnect, to honor the non-existent, rather insistent, indwelling spirit of Christ that is holding the whole thing together, renewing the whole story together, reconciling the whole story. And the question is will we participate with that? And sex is only part of that story.
So true. So true. What you've given us, Shane, is a wonderful framework. I love the questions, the pictures that you can think through. And in my mind, that actually leads to purity. Yes. Much more than don't do it, or how far can I go? Not very far. And, when I look at the churches that have preached that, over the process of time, you hear about abuse and broken relationships and all of this, pedophilia, all sorts of stuff going on. Yeah. Versus when what you're talking about actually leads us to think things through and to make a choice to Correct. Live a life that is pleasing to the indwelling Holy Spirit. That's wonderful. Mate, thank you so much for your time. It's been great, as always.
Thanks, Rob. You're a great conversation partner. I love this.
Wonderful. Well, I hope you enjoyed my interview with Shane and some wonderful teaching there, and encourage you to maybe spend a bit more time just listening to that again, making a few notes if you haven't done. Great questions, as I said, toward the end there. A wonderful framework to really think things through in life. And as I say, I hope you found that helpful. Just a couple of questions. Rihanna says, great night. Thank you both. Beautiful teaching, as does Merv Tal. God bless you, mate. This is wonderful stuff. Shane has and I do not say this often, a very Hebraic view of text. I would love to have a Talmudic dialogue with you, with the two of you. Maybe we could tie that in with a possible CETA session. I would love to do that. A lot of it, of course, Tal, depends on Shane's schedule, which is nuts, I got to say. But I am hoping that I can get a time with him sometime in 2024 to do something like that. Sandra, great questions to think about rather than the very linear do and don't type responses you would normally hear. I totally agree with that. Thank you, Chris. God bless you. And Grant and Ross as well, who says there's so much to absorb there. Yes, indeed. And I'm going to leave that online. Of course, the audio from that will be the Digging Deeper podcast over the next couple of weeks as well. So you can enjoy it, share it with other people as well. Let other people know about Tuesday Night Live and the Digging Deeper podcast. And let's get the good news of the scriptures circulating around. Next Tuesday is Halloween. And so I thought it'd be good to spend a little bit of Tuesday Night Live amongst all the other questions that I've been asked, just doing a bit of a deep dive into Halloween and a Christian response. So that's next Tuesday night. Hope to see you this weekend, either in person or online at Bayside Church, as we look at how to get along with each other as Christian people. So I hope to have your company then. Have a wonderful week. Good night and God bless you.